Welcome to Tucker Carlson. Today, Michael Flynn was Donald Trump's first national security advisor. Of all the high-level Trump appointees, Michael Flynn may have been the most qualified. He was a three-star Army general. He received his first star after only 23 years in the United States Army. Almost all of his time was deployed. He spent 5 years in Iraq and years in other countries around the world, serving with Special Operations Forces. Then he moved into the intel world. He was number 2 for national intelligence, and he ran the Defense Intelligence Agency. He had a deep background in American intelligence gathering and in how the U.S. government worked. So he was, again, probably the most qualified person chosen as national security advisor in memory. And then in days, he was gone. In the chaos of the early Trump administration, you probably remember it well, out of nowhere, Michael Flynn was accused of crimes. And on February 13th, 2017, he left the White House. He was later charged by the Department of Justice effectively for lying to the FBI. And then we never heard from Michael Flynn. In 4 years, he did not give a single interview. Meanwhile, the entire news media talked about him, but we never heard from the man they were talking about. There was a lot going on in the country at the time, as you recall, and for a lot of us, his name faded from memory. Michael Flynn. They tell us he did something wrong. What exactly did he do? And then on to the next thing. Speaking for our show, it wasn't until May of 2020, years after the fact, that evidence came to the surface that showed very clearly Michael Flynn did nothing wrong. The whole thing was a setup. It was a hit. Here was our assessment for May of 2020, years late, by the way, but this is what we finally concluded. Michael Flynn did not commit a crime, and they knew it. How did they know? Because the FBI had already tapped Michael Flynn's phone, which itself is a shocking outrage, completely unacceptable in a free country, that for some reason nobody in Washington seems to notice or care about. They should. Because the FBI already knew what Flynn had said in the call in detail, there was, the department announced today, quote, no justification or need to review Mr. Flynn as to his own personal recollections of what had been said, because they knew. In other words, the whole thing was a setup from the first moment. How often does the FBI set people up? How many other lives have they destroyed without the public knowing about it? In other words, this isn't about Michael Flynn, it's about you. It's scary to think about that. So for years, you have heard people on television dismiss General Michael Flynn as crazy, a conspiracy nut, as unqualified. He is, of course, none of those things. The opposite is true in every case. And it's possible that's why they took him out. But you can decide for yourself today, because Michael Flynn joins us in studio to describe what has happened to him. General, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate
It's a real honor to be here.
And my apologies to you for taking so long to connect the dots in your case. There was just a flurry. Of course, your life was completely defined by what happened to you, but for the rest of us who are paid to watch what's happening to American society, there was just so much going on, and your case was wholly defined by your enemies, who acted with speed and maximum aggression, as they always do, and you were not speaking on your own behalf. And so they effectively defined you in your case, and it was only, again, when the evidence emerged that it became clear that they took out the National Security Advisor of the United States, and they did it purely for political reasons in a way that should terrify all of us. Anyway, I'm grateful that you're here, and I'm happy that you've emerged from all of this. Why do you think, and who do you think, took you out as National Security Advisor?
So it's very clear now that the previous administration, previous to the Trump administration, so Barack Obama, Joe Biden, members of his team, members of Obama's team, they were definitely part of this whole thing, and it goes all the way down to the lead agents in the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. One of the fascinating documents I think is really worth pursuing and looking at for anybody that really wants to know this case. One of the lead agents by the name of Barnett in October of 2020, so not that long ago, I mean a year ago now, right? Barnett gave a testimony, 302, which is one of the FBI forms, and it's about 9 pages long, and it's essentially his testimony as to what, because I think he felt guilty. He was telling the court and the Attorney General what happened. And he waited until October of 2020 to do this. So this is the lead agent for Crossfire Hurricane. He was a guy that I met with a number of times, an FBI agent that I met with a number of times during my cooperating agreement. And he seemed like a decent guy, but I think he just got a guilt complex. And in the fall of 2020, October 2020, about a 9-page 302, and in it, he essentially says the entire effort was get Flynn to get Trump. Yeah. And I mean, it's that clear. And so when you think about what you described in May, I think that's really that's good clarity for viewers, because it took so many years for the truth to rise to the top. And the one thing that I always felt from the beginning, because I knew what was happening at that time, I felt it like, boy, these people are coming after me because they know they do not want me around Trump. They know what I know about them, and I'm talking about the CIA primarily, the intelligence community, parts of the Department of Defense, parts of the State Department, and many other elements within our government. And they did not want me advising President Trump in the most senior national security position in the United States of America. And so when I learned eventually, and I learned this even previous to Barnett, that the effort was to get Flynn to get Trump. I mean, he pretty much said that in his deposition. And as I think about that, and I think you said this in a couple of your commentaries over time, the American people, they saw through this from the very beginning, because it wasn't about Mike Flynn. It wasn't even about Donald Trump. It was about them. And when the left and the media started to attack the presidency of the United States of America, the American people saw that, hey, this is an attack on us.
Yes.
And thank God for me, because, and for my family and I, because the American people actually came to our aid. So in a funny way, the more quiet I was, because I just made the decision that I wasn't going to say anything until this whole mess was over with. But the more that they beat on me, the more that the media came and attacked me and called me all sorts of names, people dug more and more into my life and dug more and more into everything that surrounded what was happening. And it actually became a huge stain on the justice system in the United States of America. And this will, I'm not certain, Tucker, if this stain can ever be cleaned. I really don't, because you're talking about the National Security Advisor of the United States of America to the President of the United States. And it's an extraordinary assault on frankly, everything that we believe in this country.
Democracy itself. Yeah. And you have to ask, and this is ultimately what made me interested in your case, is why did they single you out? So this is a brand new administration. Right. I think the number is about 3,000 appointees are hired at the beginning of every administration for all kinds of different jobs. National Security Advisor is a top job, of course, but there are other big jobs.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't go after those guys. They went after you with real intensity from the very beginning. Now, the two things they said about you were that you were crazy and that you were dishonest. And it shouldn't, I guess, surprise our viewers to learn that the opposite is true in both of those cases. There were a lot of incompetent people hired
Absolutely.
in this administration. Like, I've almost never seen that many incompetent people in one room. Omarosa actually got hired.
Yep.
Jared Kushner. I mean, just it's a long list. You actually had the deepest grounding
right.
in the U.S. government and how things actually work, the most knowledge of the intel community of anybody in the entire administration. Maybe that's why they went after you.
Well, not just from a military perspective. I mean, my time as up as the Assistant Director of National Intelligence, I was responsible for a lot of domestic issues, definitely responsible for a lot of international issues. My time as the head of one of the largest intelligence agencies in the world, the Defense Intelligence Agency, which is the military's arm of the intelligence community. We're in 142 countries around the world. I mean, I've been on 6 continents. Not just my time in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere, Middle East, Caribbean, Central America in my earlier years in the military, but I had extensive international, foreign, and domestic experiences, and both from military, law enforcement, security, intelligence, diplomacy, all those issues that you deal with. And that was one of the reasons why when I started to help Trump candidate Trump in 2016, that we were attracted to each other because his view of the world, and I'm a military guy by training, but I'm anti-war. I'm not one of these guys that wants to go to war. I mean, it's like that's the last thing we have to do. But we have people.
How long did you spend in Iraq?
I spent better part of 5 years.
Okay.
Iraq and Afghanistan. I say I lived in Iraq and I vacationed in Afghanistan for the better part of 5 years. Yeah, my life, and that's my family's life too. And
you've earned those views.
Well, I mean, and I also when I look at the decisions that were made, and so he and I shared a lot of conversations about strategic decisions that were made that got us to where we are today. And that's not just in the Middle East, but that's everything. That's trade. That's our political system, the direction that the country has started to turn toward. And I think that everybody is starting to see that now. If I take a step back and look at this from sort of the 60,000 foot level, my case and my situation is really a microcosm of what is happening in the larger enterprise of the United States of America right now. I mean, the takeover of our system of government by a few to rule the many, so to speak. They had to get rid of people like me because as the National Security Advisor, I'm responsible for everything. I mean, for pretty much everything in terms of the security system of our country, and then the principal advisor to the President of the United States. And you're a cabinet position. You're in a cabinet position appointed by the president, not necessarily. You don't have to be nominated to the Senate or any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
You don't have to go through all that. So what they had to do is they had to figure out a way to get to me and to describe me in a way that made it sound like, okay, he's just a crazy guy. All these bad things that he's done in his career. And I'm like saying to myself, wait a second. I mean, you look at my career, and it's really a pretty stellar career. I'm proud of it. Well,
if you're crazy, why did you work for Barack Obama running the Defense Intelligence
Twice
Agency?
Barack Obama appointed me for two different positions, 2 3-star positions, and twice I was confirmed by the Senate, fully confirmed, 100% confirmed by the Senate. So they have to look at every single aspect of your life. And that was only, so I'm working for Trump in 2015 and 2016, and then of course a little bit in 2017. I had just left the military in 2014. So what changed, right?
You had just been working for Obama.
I had just been working for Obama for previous to that.
Literally. So if you're running one of our biggest intelligence agencies, it's fair to say you know the country's secrets.
Yeah.
I mean, how could you not? That's your job, right?
Right. It's not just the secrets of the system and how we operate, but it's how we're organized. It's how decisions are made. It's who is actually in control of the government. I used to joke in one of my jobs I think it was at DIA that to the people that were working for me at the time, I used to say that in the military, just a pure military unit, if you gave an order, turn right, the entire formation would turn right, and people would do what you asked them to do. In the federal government, in a bureaucracy, you tell the organization to turn right, they're going to give you a white paper or a long missive about why they can't do that. That they're going to basically tell you in reams and reams of paper why they can't do what you just asked them to do. And you're saying, well, wait a second, I'm the boss. I say we've got to operate in this. We have to make these changes for the betterment of this organization and for the budgets that we're going to have or the budgets that we're not going to have. And you run into a bureaucracy, and I understood that bureaucracy. In spades, and they knew it. And the kinds of things that I was asking about. So after Trump won, and I think it was a big surprise to everybody.
Yep.
In November of 2016, when he won, and I was the second person that he appointed into any jobs. So chief of staff was the first one, and I think I was the next day. And so I started once I was appointed in that position, I went to work. And as you would expect a person, as the American people should expect anybody that's going into a significant job like that to do. So I went to work and I started to ask questions. And they're the type of very, very uncomfortable questions that people in government don't like to be asked by people like the National Security Advisor. I mean, if it's some other bumpkin in government somewhere, it doesn't make any difference. But, you know, because they're not going to be able to affect who you are. But if it's the National Security Advisor that begins to ask about programs and budgets and organizations and structures and decisions that have been made in the past, and because I knew what many of these were, I had already studied them. I had studied them in droves when I was as the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, because I had to. I mean, you would expect, that's what I would expect somebody in that position to do, was to really understand what it was that we were about and what kinds of decisions we're going to make. We're making decisions, Tucker, not only about people's lives, but we're making decisions about the government's relationships with alliances around the world that are going to have lasting impacts that will change the course of history for this country. So when I started to ask a lot of these questions, I knew that there was a discomfort, particularly in some realms of the intelligence community, and they would always have to come back to me with more, right? Because they would go, "Well, we don't have that, we don't have that information right now." And I said, "Well, I'd like to see that. Next time, I want you to set up another meeting, and I want to go through this again and again and again." The other thing too that was very clear, and I knew that I was going to do, because that's, if you look at my career, particularly the second half of my career, I started to take over larger and larger organizations. And one of the aspects of Mike Flynn in the military was I'm a very reform-minded guy. And so I would look at organizations and I would adjust those organizations for the times that we face, right? For the types of wars that we're in, for the types of leaders that we have. You have to make constant changes and adjustments, and that's healthy for any organization. So one of the things that I had talked about was I had talked about reforming the National Security Council. And at the height of the Cold War in the 80s, and then even before that, and I'll just use Henry Kissinger as a former National Security Advisor, at the height when we were facing, the nuclear war against the Soviet Union at the time, the National Security Council was around 45 people. I was looking at walking into an organization that had about 400 people. And it wasn't the scale or the size of the numbers, because I had dealt with organizations from 6,000 to almost 20,000 in some of the organizations that I led. But I was looking at the ability to make decisions and make them in a rapid fashion, and also to downsize an organization that had become so bloated in the previous decade. So I wanted to go from about 400 back to the days of sort of the height of the Cold War era, down to about 45 in the National Security Council. Well, when you do that, suddenly all of these organizations of government now don't have their spies in the White House, because that's really what the National Security Council, the bloating of the National Security Council did.
So we should just say for our viewers that the NSC has people on loan from a bunch of different government agencies.
There's only really in the National Security Council, and I appreciate you bringing that up, the National Security Council really only has about 25 actual appointees in the White House.
Right.
So you need to have a couple of other experts, because you have other issues, particularly nuclear weapons and some other subject matter expertise that you need, but you don't need to have 400 people hanging around and just like call them wall walkers. And so what they have done over the years is, the more an organization can give to the National Security Council, the bigger that they can make it, the more insight they have into what's going on in the White House.
Right.
And man, you talk about, if you go back to the number of leaks, just the leaks alone at the beginning of the Trump administration in 2017, it was extraordinary. And they still don't know. They can investigate those leaks all day long. They're never going to learn where those leaks came from. The leak of the phone call, for example, between myself and the Russian ambassador, which became a really big deal. It's still a massive felony. I doubt if the Department of Justice, they're investigating school boards instead of investigating a massive, massive crime against the country itself, against not only the National Security Advisor, but against the entire country when they did something like that. So I really wanted to create a more agile National Security Council that was really the way that Trump wanted to operate. Trump he wanted to operate, and we talked about this, he wanted to operate nimbly, with a lot more agility, ability to make better decisions, and with the experts that he needed when he needed them. And so that was one of my goals in like the first, maybe 90 days, 6 months, was to downsize that. So as people came up on their times from their being loaned from the CIA or being loaned from the State Department, I was just going to let those timelines run out and let them go back to their home. And if we needed them, we could always ask for the expert, right? But what you find is it's like you're going into an enemy camp. In the case of the Trump administration, it was like walking into an enemy camp, and you felt. I mean, I felt like I didn't feel threatened, but I felt like, man, all of these people are here to do nothing more than just hurt this president.
Yeah.
And it was like and what we've learned. So this is all public. So if people really wanted to dig into the case against Mike Flynn and all of the filings and all the things that have come out, even now, we still see stuff coming out now with this Sussman indictment and some of the other things that I think that Durham is actually is going to probably start to look at. I think it's fascinating, and I think what you learn is that we have two separate governments. We have the one that actually gets elected and goes into office, and then you have a government inside of Washington, D.C. that operates under no rules, no authorities other than their own or who's ever in charge of their
Sounds like that
organizations.
government was still controlled by Barack Obama.
Yeah, and